the sky cracked open. Not with lightning, but with shadows, colossal vessels blotting out the sun, their metallic hulls shimmering ominously against the bright blue. People stopped in their tracks, necks craned upwards, eyes wide with disbelief. Children clung to their parents, fear freezing every bustling street and busy sidewalk. In a small suburban neighborhood, Daniel stood rooted in his front yard, lawnmower humming softly behind him, forgotten. His hands trembled as he watched the ships descend, their size dwarfing skyscrapers, their presence suffocating. He felt his heartbeat in his throat, a cold chill crawling down his spine. It wasn't the sight of the ships that terrified him, but the realization that humanity was no longer alone. The news channels went live within minutes, anchors struggling to keep their voices steady. Words like alien contact and extraterrestrial visitors echoed through homes across the world. Governments issued statements of caution, urging calm, but the quiver in their voices betrayed their fear. Daniel's wife, Ellen, ran out to join him, her face pale. Are they here to hurt us?" she whispered, gripping his arm. Daniel couldn't answer. He could only shake his head, his eyes locked on the behemoth ships now hovering just above the city skyline, perfectly still, as if watching, waiting. Days passed, and humanity held its breath. There was no sign of aggression, no attacks, no communication, only an unsettling silence that weighed heavy on every heart. People grew restless, some in awe, others in panic. The streets were empty, businesses closed, life put on hold as the world awaited a sign. Then, a voice echoed across every screen, every device, every radio. Deep, resonant, and disturbingly calm. It spoke in perfect human languages, one by one, from English to Mandarin, Arabic to Swahili. The message was simple: we have come to test you. Test. Daniel's mind raced, confusion twisting into fear. What did that mean? Why test humanity? And how? Before the world could process the message, a bright light burst from the center of each ship, spreading across the sky like ripples on water. The ground trembled, windows shattered, and a force like an invisible wave swept through the city. Daniel staggered back, shielding Ellen as they collapsed onto the lawn. The air felt heavy, electric, as if charged with unseen energy. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light faded, the tremors ceased, and a cold silence followed. The ships remained, unmoving, ominous. But everything else had changed. Daniel's phone buzzed violently. He scrambled to grab it, his eyes widening as he read the alert. All communication networks were down, no internet, no satellites, no electricity. Civilization was plunged into darkness. But that wasn't the worst of it. As Daniel looked down his street, he realized the horror of their test. People were collapsing, clutching their chests, gasping for breath. Elderly neighbors fell to their knees, their faces twisted in agony. A man down the road staggered out of his house, disoriented, before collapsing face first onto the pavement. The aliens had not attacked with weapons or violence. They had attacked with weakness, humanity's own. And as the first wave of casualties spread across the city, Daniel understood the cruel nature of their test. Only the strongest would survive. Panic erupted. Screams echoed through the neighborhood as people rushed to aid those who had collapsed. Cars swerved wildly, drivers blinded by fear, and sirens wailed in the distance. The world was crumbling, not by destruction, but by helplessness. Daniel pulled Ellen to her feet, his heart pounding. "We need to get inside. Now," he shouted, dragging her towards the house. His mind raced, questions colliding like a storm. Why were some collapsing while others stood unaffected? What did the aliens mean by testing them? Slamming the door behind them, Daniel bolted it, his hands trembling. Ellen's eyes were wide with terror, tears brimming. "What's happening, Daniel? Why are people, why are they?" Her voice broke, the words too painful to finish. I don't know, Daniel admitted, his voice hollow. But whatever it is, we need to stay safe. Find water, food, whatever you can. We might be on our own. The power was out, and their phones were useless, screens blank, no signal, no connection. The isolation was suffocating. Daniel grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its dim beam cutting through the shadows. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The street was chaos. Some people were running, others stumbling as if drunk, their movements disoriented, sluggish. But the worst were those who lay motionless, sprawled across lawns and sidewalks, eyes staring blankly at the sky. They're just dropping, Daniel whispered, his stomach twisting. He watched as an elderly woman staggered a few steps before crumpling beside her mailbox, her frail body limp. Ellen's voice trembled behind him. Why are we okay? Why aren't we, like them? Daniel didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing, the aliens had done something that was choosing who survived and who didn't. And it wasn't random. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud banging on the door. He turned sharply, his pulse racing. Ellen gasped, backing away. Who is it? A voice called out, panicked, desperate. Please help me. Open the door. Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the lock. He recognized the voice, Paul, their neighbor from across the street. He opened the door cautiously, keeping his body tense, ready. Paul stumbled in, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. He was gasping, every breath a struggle. My wife, she fell. I tried to, but she wouldn't wake up, and then, he broke down, his shoulders shaking. I don't know what's happening. Why are they dying? Daniel guided Paul to the couch, helping him sit. Ellen fetched a glass of water, but Paul's hands trembled too much to hold it. I was fine, but then I started feeling heavy. Weak. Like something's draining me. Daniel's chest tightened. Was it happening to Paul too? Would he and Ellen be next? Paul's breathing grew more ragged, his skin paling. He looked up, his eyes hollow, sunken. I feel so tired, and then, without warning, he went limp, his head slumping forward. Ellen screamed, rushing to his side. Paul, wake up. She shook him, but his body was lifeless, his skin cold. Daniel's hands shook as he checked for a pulse. Nothing. Paul was gone, just like the others. Ellen backed away, her face ashen. We could be next, Daniel. Whatever's happening, it's spreading. Daniel stared at Paul's body, fear twisting in his gut. They were being hunted, not by creatures or weapons, but by something invisible, something that chose who lived and who died. He looked out the window at the ship still hovering, silent, watching. Testing. They were waiting to see who would survive. The silence in the room was deafening. Ellen sat beside Paul's lifeless body, her face pale and drawn, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the couch. Daniel stood by the window, eyes scanning the streets below. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. Everywhere he looked, the chaos seemed to intensify. People were running in all directions, but most of them were collapsing, succumbing to whatever force the aliens had unleashed. And the worst part? The ships, those enormous, intimidating vessels that had loomed over their city, hadn't moved. They didn't attack. They didn't even seem to care. They just watched. Daniel's breath hitched as a realization began to form in his mind. The invaders weren't here to conquer, they were here to observe, to test, and to choose. But why? Why had they left some people untouched while others were decimated in an instant? What were they measuring? A voice jolted Daniel from his thoughts. Ellen stood up, her voice shaking. Daniel, there's something on the news. You need to see this. He turned, his stomach tightening. Ellen had the television on, the screen flickering with distorted images. News anchors, faces filled with panic, spoke in hurried, fragmented sentences. The words, alien invasion, mysterious deaths, and strange phenomenon repeated over and over. But what caught Daniel's attention was a breaking news headline that made his blood run cold. U.S. government confirms, the alien ships are performing tests on human resistance. Those who collapse are failing the test. Only the strongest survive. His heart skipped a beat. What does that mean? Ellen whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Daniel muttered, staring at the screen, his mind trying to process the terrifying information. But it's not just some attack. They're watching us. They're choosing. As the hours passed, they huddled together, glued to the TV, trying to piece together whatever they could. The news reports painted a horrifying picture. In cities all over the world, people were dropping like flies, their bodies succumbing to whatever the aliens had unleashed. But it wasn't just the weak who were falling, some of the strongest, most capable people were also struck down. Daniel's thoughts raced back to the people they had seen outside, the ones who had collapsed, the ones who were still lying motionless in the streets. What's the difference? Daniel wondered aloud. Why are we still here? Ellen shook her head. I don't know. Maybe we're stronger. Maybe something about us didn't fail their test. She wiped a tear from her cheek. But what happens when we do? What happens if we fail? Daniel's mind flashed to the empty, lifeless eyes of their neighbor, Paul. What if they were next? What if they couldn't outrun whatever the aliens were looking for? Suddenly, a strange noise interrupted the tension. A soft hum. It seemed to come from outside. Daniel shot up, heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed the flashlight and darted to the window. Through the blinds, he saw something that made his stomach churn. A group of people, maybe 10 or 15, were standing in a tight circle in the middle of the street. At first, it seemed like an innocent gathering. But as Daniel's eyes scanned the group, something was off. They weren't moving. Their eyes were blank, almost lifeless. Ellen, look, Daniel whispered. Those people, they're not moving. But they're standing. Ellen's breath hitched, her hand tightening on Daniel's shoulder. They're all standing still. But they look, her voice trailed off, and she pressed her hand to her mouth in horror. Daniel's gut twisted as he realized the truth. They weren't just standing still, they were waiting. Waiting for something to happen. And in the center of the group, there was a figure, taller than the rest, standing motionless, just like the others. But unlike the others, its eyes weren't lifeless. They were gleaming. Cold and calculating. It's them, Daniel said, his voice low. They're watching. And then, as if to confirm his worst fear, a voice boomed from above, its tone chilling. Your species has been tested. Only the strongest will remain. The voice echoed through the streets, reverberating in Daniel's chest. He could feel the weight of the words. The aliens weren't just picking people to save, they were deciding who was worthy of survival. And with each passing moment, the question lingered in his mind, would he and Ellen make it through the test? Would they survive? A cold shiver ran down his spine as he turned to Ellen. We need to leave. Now. They had to find out what the aliens wanted. They had to understand this test. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't survive long enough to see the answer. The test was just beginning. And the true cost of survival would soon become clear. The silence between Daniel and Ellen was suffocating. They stood together in the dimly lit room, fear heavy in the air. The streets outside were still, eerily quiet, as though the city itself was holding its breath. The voices from the television echoed in their minds, each one more terrifying than the last. "We need to leave," Daniel said again, his tone firm but laced with anxiety. "We have to understand what they want, why some are failing and others, passing." Ellen nodded, her face pale but resolute. She grabbed her jacket, her hands shaking as she slipped it on. "Let's go. We can't sit here waiting to die." They gathered a few essentials, water, some canned food, and a flashlight. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Paul's body, now cold and lifeless on the couch. A wave of guilt washed over him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for mourning now. Ellen touched his arm, her voice soft. "We'll make it. We have to." The two of them left the apartment in a rush, moving swiftly through the building's dim corridors, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the danger they were walking into. They made their way down the stairs, through the back door, and into the street. The night air was thick with tension, and the sounds of distant sirens wailed in the distance. But the strangest thing was the stillness. The street, usually bustling with the sounds of traffic and people, was eerily quiet. Daniel glanced around, his pulse quickening. It felt as if the whole world had been abandoned, except for the figure that stood at the end of the block. A tall man, no, not a man, a figure, stood frozen in place, his back to them, facing the enormous ship that loomed overhead. His posture was rigid, like a soldier awaiting orders, but his expression was one of perfect calm. Daniel couldn't explain it, but there was something unsettling about the way he stood. "Who is that?" Ellen whispered, her breath shallow. "Why is he standing there?" Daniel couldn't take his eyes off the figure. "I don't know, but he doesn't look scared." As they drew closer, they realized something was wrong. The figure was standing with his eyes closed, a strange, faint glow surrounding him. It wasn't an ordinary light, it was a pulsing, rhythmic glow, almost like the beating of a heart. Suddenly, without warning, the ground beneath them began to shake, a low rumble reverberating through the city. The ship above them shifted, its massive form seemingly alive, responding to something below. Daniel's heart raced, his mind spinning. "That's it," he said, realization dawning on him. "The test, it's not just about survival. They're looking for something deeper. Something within us." Ellen's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I think," Daniel said, his voice steady but full of uncertainty, "they're measuring our hearts. Our resolve. The strength within us, not just our bodies. That's why people are collapsing, they're not strong enough, not mentally or emotionally resilient. But that man, he's passing. He's not just surviving. He's becoming part of whatever this is." The shaking intensified, and the man's body began to tremble, as though the test was reaching its climax. His form flickered for a moment, like a glitch in a hologram, before solidifying again. The glow around him intensified, almost blinding. Daniel and Ellen shielded their eyes, unable to look away. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The figure before them stood completely still, no longer glowing, but completely consumed by the alien presence above. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The air seemed to crackle with energy. "I told you," a voice boomed from the heavens, echoing in the street, "the test has concluded. The strongest survive." The words sent a shockwave through Daniel's chest, and he turned to Ellen, his eyes wide. "We need to move. This isn't just a test of strength anymore. It's about more than survival. It's about—" A low, guttural growl cut him off. Daniel's heart leaped into his throat as he turned to face the direction of the sound. From behind the glowing figure, a group of shadowy figures emerged. They were humanoid in shape but appeared as dark silhouettes, their faces obscured by a strange mist. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They were different. Not like the normal alien soldiers they had seen. These beings radiated a cold, menacing energy that felt utterly foreign to him. They were towering, their movements slow but deliberate, like predators closing in on their prey. "The cost is more than survival," the voice continued, chilling and unyielding. "You will face consequences. The weakest among you will not be spared." Ellen clutched Daniel's arm, her eyes filled with fear. "What are they going to do? What do they want from us?" Daniel didn't know how to answer. He didn't know if they would be the next ones to fall. But he did know one thing: they couldn't let fear control them. They couldn't give in to the terror that gripped their hearts. "The test isn't over yet," Daniel muttered. "But we will survive. We have to." Suddenly, the ground shook again. The towering shadows moved, their glowing eyes locked on Daniel and Ellen as if weighing them, measuring them for what came next. The alien presence above them pulsed once more. And then the voice, chilling and final, echoed in the air. "Your test has only begun." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as the towering figures advanced, their eyes glowing with a cold intensity that sent chills down his spine. Each step they took seemed to make the air grow heavier, thicker with an unseen pressure. The shadows that moved toward them weren't just alien soldiers, they were something else, something far more sinister. Ellen tugged on Daniel's arm, her face twisted in fear. "We need to run, now." But Daniel didn't move. His eyes were locked on the creatures, trying to understand what they wanted. He could feel the weight of their gaze, a silent judgment that seemed to pierce through him. These weren't just invaders, they were assessors, and their test was far from over. "We're not running," Daniel replied, his voice low but determined. "Not yet." The figures stopped just a few feet away, their forms towering over them like dark monoliths. They didn't speak, but their presence alone was enough to make the air feel suffocating, oppressive. Daniel felt as though they were being weighed, measured, and found wanting. For a moment, everything was still. The glowing eyes of the alien figures stared at them, unblinking, and Daniel had the unnerving feeling that they could see right through him, that they knew everything. His mind raced. Why hadn't they attacked? What were they waiting for? Then, one of the figures stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It raised a hand, and a soft, melodic hum filled the air. Daniel felt the ground beneath his feet tremble, and suddenly, a projection appeared in front of them, a hologram, glowing with an eerie, blue light. It was a map of Earth, or at least, the version of Earth they knew. The cities, the landscapes, all distorted and fading in and out like a damaged video. But it was clear enough for Daniel to understand: humanity was losing. The invasion had already begun, and the world was being torn apart. "This is the cost of your failure," the voice echoed again, deep and resonant, reverberating in the air like the sound of an earthquake. "You believed you were strong, but your unity was fragile, your resilience fleeting. You are not prepared for what comes next." Daniel's stomach churned as he looked at the map. Cities were gone, engulfed in fire, smoke rising from the ashes. It was a nightmare made real. Ellen gasped beside him, her hand shaking in his as she watched the devastation unfold before their eyes. "What's happening to them?" she whispered, barely able to speak. "What are they doing to our world?" Before Daniel could respond, the figure's hand moved once more, and the hologram shifted. It zoomed in on one particular area, what used to be a thriving city center. Now, it was reduced to rubble, buildings crushed into debris, streets cracked open like wounds. But there was something else in the center of the destruction. A group of survivors, huddled together, clinging to life. "That's us," Daniel muttered, his voice barely audible. The survivors in the hologram were wearing the same clothes, the same expressions of fear and despair. They looked like they had given up, defeated. The alien figure looked down at them with cold, unblinking eyes. "This is the result of your weakness. This is what happens when you underestimate your enemy, when you fail to stand united." A sudden wave of despair hit Daniel. It was true. They had been divided. They had underestimated the aliens, thinking that somehow, they could fight back. But now it was too late. Their world was crumbling, and the cost of that arrogance was more than they could bear. The figure continued, its voice echoing like a command. You must learn the true meaning of strength. If you cannot stand together, you will be consumed, just like the others. Ellen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the projection. We can't let this happen. We can't just give up. Daniel nodded, a fire sparking within him despite the overwhelming fear. We won't. I don't care how impossible it seems, we're not going down without a fight. We'll find a way. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, its cold gaze narrowing as it studied them both. There was a flicker of something in its eyes, something that seemed almost like amusement. Very well, the alien said, its voice laced with an unsettling calmness. You wish to fight? Then prove it. Show me your strength. In an instant, the ground beneath Daniel and Ellen's feet cracked open, and they were both pulled into the earth with a violent force. The world around them seemed to collapse, the streets, the sky, everything was swallowed by darkness. Daniel's body slammed into the hard ground. He gasped for air, his limbs aching, but he pushed himself up, determined. Ellen was beside him, equally shaken but not broken. The darkness was thick, suffocating, but in the distance, a faint light flickered, a sign that there was more ahead. The voice of the alien reverberated through the darkness. You will not find peace. Your strength will be tested. Prove yourselves worthy. Daniel's breath was shallow as he helped Ellen to her feet. The world around them felt like it was closing in, but the faint light ahead was their only hope. Come on, Daniel said, his voice hoarse but filled with conviction. We've got this. We're stronger than they think. They moved toward the light, the weight of their situation pressing down on them, but their resolve was clear. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, they would stand together. This was their world, their fight, and they wouldn't let it fall without a struggle. But as they moved forward, something shifted in the air. The light ahead flickered again, and then, with a sudden roar, the ground beneath them shattered. A massive, hulking figure emerged from the darkness, a creature far more terrifying than anything they had faced before. It was no longer just about survival. Now, it was about proving that humanity's strength wasn't just in their ability to survive, it was in their refusal to be crushed by fear. The real test was about to begin. The air was thick with the scent of burning ash, and the ground beneath Daniel's feet quaked as the massive creature towered over them. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them with an unsettling intensity, and every movement it made sent tremors through the earth. The light they had been walking toward flickered, its hope now distant, almost unreachable. The true nature of their challenge had finally revealed itself. The creature's massive form loomed above them like an ancient god, dark, monstrous, and terrifying. Its skin was like iron, black and glistening, pulsing with an unnatural energy. Its claws extended, sharp enough to rend the very air. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back, instinctively pulling Ellen behind him. We have to fight, he said through gritted teeth, his voice firm despite the fear that gripped him. This is our chance to show them. Ellen's hand trembled in his, but she nodded, her eyes resolute. Together, we fight. The alien creature let out a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the earth, shaking the very foundations of their world. Its deep, resonating voice filled the air as it spoke. You think you can defeat me? You are weak. You are nothing. The words stung like a slap, and Daniel's anger flared. He had never felt more certain in his life. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about proving humanity's strength, showing that they were capable of far more than their invaders ever realized. But how could they win? The creature was far too powerful. Even as the thought crossed his mind, the ground cracked open again, and the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, swiping its claws through the air. Daniel barely managed to duck, feeling the rush of wind as the creature's claws narrowly missed his face. The force of the attack was so strong that it left a deep gash in the earth where it struck. Ellen screamed, stumbling backward, her face pale with fear. But Daniel didn't have time to check if she was okay, he had to focus. The creature was relentless, its attacks coming faster and faster. Daniel's muscles burned, his body screaming in protest as he dodged and weaved, trying to stay ahead of the alien's deadly strikes. "We have to find a way to hurt it," Daniel shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Something to stop it." Ellen, still gasping for breath, looked around frantically. Her eyes flicked to the ground and then to a piece of metal protruding from the rubble nearby, sharp and jagged, its edges catching the dim light. "I'll distract it." "You grab the metal," she shouted, her voice shaking but determined. Without waiting for a response, Ellen charged forward, drawing the creature's attention. It let out a deafening roar and swiped its massive claws at her, but she ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the blow. Daniel's heart raced as he sprinted toward the jagged metal, praying that this would work. He grabbed the metal shard, its edges sharp and cold against his fingers. In one swift motion, he swung it toward the creature, aiming for its underbelly. But the creature anticipated his move, swiping the air with a claw that sent Daniel flying backward. The metal shard flew from his hand, spinning into the darkness. He landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. For a moment, he couldn't move, disoriented by the impact. Ellen's voice rang out, a rallying cry that fueled him with renewed strength. "Get up, Daniel. We can't let it win." With great effort, Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his body aching. But something inside him had shifted. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was fighting for everything he believed in, everything they all had built. This fight, this challenge, was a test of humanity's true strength. The creature lunged again, but this time, Daniel was ready. He ducked, dodging its strike, and, in a single fluid motion, he grabbed a piece of rubble and hurled it at the creature's glowing eyes. The rock struck with a deafening crack, causing the creature to stagger backward, momentarily disoriented. This was their chance. "Ellen! Now!" Daniel shouted. Ellen, with the fire of determination in her eyes, sprinted forward. She grabbed another piece of sharp metal and rushed toward the creature, aiming for the exposed weakness Daniel had just created. With all her strength, she thrust the metal into the creature's chest, right where the glowing core pulsated with life. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, its body convulsing as the metal pierced its core. It thrashed violently, sending shockwaves through the air. Daniel and Ellen both stumbled back, barely managing to stay on their feet as the creature's final moments were marked by an earth-shattering roar. Then, silence. The creature collapsed to the ground, its massive form crumpling like a puppet with its strings cut. The light in its eyes dimmed, and it lay still, defeated. Daniel collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving with exhaustion, but a sense of victory washed over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had fought and won. The power of unity, of standing together when everything seemed lost, had triumphed. Ellen knelt beside him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat but filled with relief. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of awe. Daniel looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "Yes, we did." But as they stood together, breathing heavily in the aftermath, the ground suddenly trembled again. Their victory was short-lived. A new threat had emerged, something far worse, something far more powerful. The final battle was far from over. Daniel stood up, his legs shaky but firm. "We haven't won yet." "Not completely." Ellen nodded, her expression one of resolve. "Then let's finish this." They didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain, they were ready to face whatever the alien forces could throw at them. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. And this fight? It was just beginning. The sound of the earth cracking beneath their feet echoed in the silence. The victory they had achieved moments before felt fragile, like a flicker of light in the dark. Yet, Daniel and Ellen knew they couldn't afford to be distracted by the calm. They had no time to rest. The real enemy, the true threat, was just beginning to reveal itself. The ground trembled again, more violently than before. The sky above, once dotted with the soft glow of distant stars, now seemed like a vast canvas of darkness, its silence broken only by the low hum of the alien craft hovering above. The craft was massive, its sheer size blocking out the stars, casting a shadow that stretched for miles. "We're not alone," Daniel said quietly, his eyes scanning the skies. The air was thick with an ominous presence that made his skin crawl. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ellen, still clutching her weapon, stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "What now?" Daniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm despite the rising panic. They had faced down an impossible monster before. They could do it again. But there was something different this time, something more dangerous. The alien craft slowly descended, its engines roaring to life, sending tremors through the ground. A hatch opened, revealing a figure that made Daniel's blood run cold. It wasn't another monster, but a being, a humanoid alien, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes were voids of darkness, no irises, no pupils, just an endless abyss. The alien stepped down onto the earth, its presence radiating an unnatural energy. It was powerful, not just in strength but in intelligence, its very aura like a threat that could crush them both with a single thought. Daniel and Ellen stood frozen, staring at the creature as it approached them, the silence stretching out, thick with tension. "You are the ones who defeated my warriors," the alien's voice was low, smooth, and filled with disdain. "You think you can challenge us? You think you can survive this invasion?" Daniel's grip tightened on the metal shard still in his hand, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of the situation was too great. Ellen's breath was shallow beside him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. They had fought so hard, and yet, now it felt like their efforts were futile. "You have no idea what you're facing," the alien continued. "Your species, your pathetic attempts at resistance are nothing. You are nothing." A deep, heavy laugh followed the words, echoing through the atmosphere. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a sound that reverberated through the bones, as if it knew all the fears, all the doubts, all the weaknesses of humanity. But Daniel stood tall. He didn't lower his eyes, didn't shrink from the alien's presence. He had come too far. Humanity had fought too hard to back down now. "You're wrong," Daniel said, his voice steady, cutting through the alien's arrogance. "We're not nothing. We've fought for everything we have. And we won't stop. We won't let you win." The alien's expression remained impassive, its features unreadable. But there was a flicker, just a flicker, of something beneath the surface. A shift. And for the first time, the alien seemed to hesitate, as if something was amiss in its perception of humanity. "Foolish humans," the alien muttered under its breath, its voice tinged with something close to recognition. "You do not understand what you face." And then, something unexpected happened. The alien's form began to distort, its body flickering like a bad transmission on a screen. For a brief moment, it wasn't the tall, metallic being it had been before. It was something else. A flash of vulnerability passed over its face, a brief glimpse of something human-like, something filled with uncertainty and fear. It was a weakness. This revelation struck like a thunderclap. Daniel realized what he had to do, what humanity's final stand meant. The alien was not invincible, not truly. It, too, was afraid of something. That fear was the key. Ellen stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with sudden understanding. It's not invulnerable. It's afraid. Without thinking, she hurled herself toward the alien, catching it off guard. The alien recoiled, its form distorting again, unable to defend against the unexpected attack. It had underestimated them. But now they knew its true fear. Daniel didn't wait for instructions. He charged in, swinging the shard of metal with all his might. His arm burned from the effort, but it didn't matter. Every inch of him was focused on the goal, on showing this alien that humanity would not be crushed. The alien screamed in agony as the metal shard found its mark, puncturing its shimmering body. But there was something more, something deeper to this victory. The alien's form flickered again, this time fading into nothingness, its presence vanishing as if it had never existed. In that moment, Daniel understood the truth. The alien forces had not come to conquer, they had come to escape. To run from something far worse than anything they had known. Something even they feared. But now, with their defeat, the alien race had revealed the final truth. Humanity was stronger than they had ever imagined. Not because of their strength, but because of their heart, their resilience, and their unwavering will to survive. It was something the invaders had failed to comprehend until it was too late. As the alien forces vanished, the sky slowly returned to its normal state, the stars beginning to shine again. The trembling stopped. The world was safe.